thanks to Buddhist Door Club for being able to participate in their 30th anniversary celebrations. So I think we all know and have heard of this gentleman, the Dalai Lama, the current Dalai Lama. But perhaps what we don't know so much generally is where this system, this tradition, originated. And the Dalai Lamas themselves ruled Tibet for 300 years, but that was from the time of the 5th Dalai Lama. They go back to, of course, the first, well, it was really the third, and then slightly retroactively back to the first. But even at the time of the first Dalai Lama, a couple of centuries before, there was the Karmapa. So these tulkus, there is a Buddhist theory lies behind it, but also just generally for the general public, that they represent lineages of succession, both in maintaining Buddhist teaching, keeping the teaching as pure and cohesive as they can, their esoteric instruction, which is passed on, and of course, previous tulku, a reincarnation lama, dies. He can't speak to his successor, but he would pass it on to a disciple, and then the disciple would then bring up the child. So it was a system that had an interregnum of probably about 16 to 20 years, while the child was being trained, and then would take it was always his, usually, position. And also the lineage of initiations, and then more prosaically, property, the monastery property, the possessions of the previous incarnate. And this led to social and political influence and power, culminating in the 17th century with the Dalai Lamas becoming the head of government, as well as the head of the major sect of Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism at that time. So the origins are from the 13th century with Karmapa, as we're going to see. His dates there 1204 to 1283, and we're going to look a little bit, just briefly, at the context of his time, then his biography. We will omit his writings so much. Half the book is concerned with a selection of translations of his writing. Quite difficult to translate. His language has been acknowledged by many scholars to be a little difficult. And then, of course, his legacy. So I've based the book mostly on his memoirs. This isn't so much an autobiography, but there are 3 main texts to it, to the collection, of which text A has 5 sections as well. So they can be a bit disjointed, so that's why I've called it memoirs rather than autobiography. The Tibetan title for it is a Rang Namta, a self-autobiography, self-liberation account, but I think memoirs suits adequately. So geographically, we know where the highlands of Tibet are in Central Asia, and these are some of the places that are important to Karmapa's life, except for Shigatse, but the mapmaker put in Shigatse as the second major town of Tibet. But you can see he traveled very far and wide. We'll be returning to this map as he travels to the various parts. Historically, the context is that there was a Tibetan empire between the 7th and 9th centuries. There was something of a collapse in the 9th century, early 9th century. And then in the late 10th, the Dharma started to be revived. During the time of the empire, some of the emperors had been very interested in Tibetan, in Buddhism, and as we know from the Dunhuang documents and so forth, they had helped create translation committees, editorial committees and so forth for the translation of the Dharma. But then there was a bit of an interregnum period. Well, not regnum really, it was the Buddhism dwindled somewhat, it seems, for this period. But then it started to be revived with translators and teachers either going to India and coming back, or indeed inviting Indian teachers to come to Tibet. And there was a great revival. And then we get, in the 13th century, Karma Pakshi begins. So this is the extent of the Tibetan Empire. Shortly before it began to collapse, shows it how widespread it is, right into China as well. And this is some of the monasteries that were established during the rekindling era. Not all of them, but just some. And Katok, over on the right, at the east side, is particularly important to Karma Pakshi. In terms of dates, when he came to be born in 1204, northern India had been invaded from the northwest in 1202 and as far east as Bengal. So the access to Buddhist sites, holy sites, was somewhat limited for Tibetans from that period on. And then there was further north of Tibet, there was the rise of the Temujin in Mongolia, who later became known as Genghis Khan in 1206. And he died in 1227 in the Tangut area in the process of trying to conquer China. And then we have the birth of Karma Pakshi in 1204. This is rather a nice illustration. A reproduction of it is in the All Souls Library in Oxford. And so this is the wider view of the places he was associated with. And then more narrowly, if you notice here, there's Dege in the middle, and you see Dege there towards the top as well. And these are the various places that he was associated with for the first 45 years of his life in East Tibet. And then he started to travel. So he was born in the upper reaches of the Yangtze River. Up in this area here, just northwest of Dege. And he was something of a precocious child. He learnt apparently to read and write without being taught, and then he would start to read scriptures and apparently understand them very easily. And by the age of 10 or 11, he decided to go to central Tibet to train properly in the Buddhist scriptures. So he started off on his journey, and he got further south of Dege and a bit more to the west, don't know exactly where, and somewhere on a hill he met this gentleman, Pomdrakpa. And Pomdrakpa asked him to stay with him a little bit, and because he was giving an initiation that evening. Now Pomdrakpa, his teacher, was Drogon Rechen. And his teacher before him was a gentleman known as Dusum Khenpa, the knower of the three times, who, as yet, at this time, was not known as the Karmapa. Karma Pakshi was known as the first, he was the first one to use the name Karmapa. He used it of himself, but nowhere in Dusum Khenpa's writings have I found yet any reference to Karmapa. So in a sense, the first Karmapa was retroactively named the first Karmapa. And we'll see how the connection is made between Pakshi and this previous saint of Dusum Khenpa, who had died 20 years earlier. There has been a translation of his writings, some of his writings, his biographical writings, in the book illustrated there, the first Karmapa. So, he met Pomdrakpa on the hillside, and they went to this initiation in the evening. And apparently, this is according to Pakshi's account, during the evening, Pomdrakpa said that he saw visions of Dusum Khenpa, who later became the first Karmapa, all around this boy. He was only 10, 11 years old. And he called him aside after the initiation and said, "You have a very strong connection with this previous saint, and I'd like you to stay with me." So we could say that this is the first stage of the reincarnation idea development during Pakshi's life, that there was a recognition of some karma connection to the predecessor. It comes eventually, as we'll see as we progress, into three stages during his life. So Pomdrakpa invited Pakshi to stay with him and learn with him. So he gave up the idea of going to central Tibet, and some of the main transmissions and teaching that he gave to Pakshi, the boy, the teenager, was on Saraha, the Dohas of Saraha, the songs of Saraha, on the Mahamudra instruction of Gampopa, who had been the teacher of Dusum Khenpa, who was, in a sense, he was the grandfather teacher to Pomdrakpa, so the great-grandfather to Pakshi. And importantly for Pakshi in particular, the so-called introduction to the three kayas. He mostly referred to as four kayas, but later writers largely refer to it as three kayas. And I do give instruction in these meditations from time to time, and when I give the instruction, it's explained why there's this slight, it's not a discrepancy, it's just that the third part of the meditation process is sort of in two parts. So it's quite acceptable to call it four kayas as well. And their visualizations concerned with pranayama breathings as well. Pakshi, later on in time, he promulgated this meditation teaching far and wide. He taught Kublai Khan, he taught Mongolian Khan, and he would teach it publicly to people. It was, I think he didn't say so, but we could assume that it was really his favorite teaching to give in public. So when he was about 18 or 19, he was sent to Katok monastery nearby. He'd been staying with Pomdrakpa for his teenage years, and then he was sent to train more intellectually at Katok, which was a Nyingma monastery, not a Kagyu monastery. And this is a picture from 2010. It's changed even more so since then. But he spent some time there with the scholars, and I don't know exactly how many years, but after a while, he then returned to Pomdrakpa, and they proceeded to head further south, because there was Mongol forces coming down on the east side of Tibet, the west side of China, mainland China, and it would seem that there was some danger occurring. So they proceeded down to Markham, down at the centre south there, and unfortunately Pomdrakpa fell ill, and this is in the 1230s by now. He died. And Karma Pakshi actually, very honestly, says that he was somewhat not knowing what to do. It's almost like, he didn't say it, of course, it's modern language, but it was something about depression about it, about his guru dying and not knowing what to do next. And then, as often happened in his life, he had a vision and he acted on the vision. And he was told to go further east and to go into retreat from the vision. So he went up to near Batang, and just northeast of Batang, he went to a place called Pungri. Well, it's not a place, it's a location, really. These buildings, these ruined buildings, come where the buildings that were built, once he'd spent a lot of time there and he'd gathered the disciples, and disciples then built this building, but it hasn't lasted. This gives some indication of the remoteness of the area. It's up high on a hill, way above the valley and the road. And he spent here in retreat 13 years. Mostly meditating on this introduction to the three karas, apparently, and also Tummo meditation and Mahamudra meditation. So after 13 years, he decided that it was time to act more in a worldly way, and he went to the various monasteries that Dusum Khenpa had established in the east. Dusum Khenpa, this is who became known as the first Karmapa, he had established a main monastery in central Tibet, but he was from the east of Tibet as well. He'd established a few in East Tibet too. But this was quite a while ago that these had been founded, these monasteries, and they'd become slightly decrepit. He had to repair roofs, and it was invigorating, perhaps, the monasteries at this time. And when he was at Karmagun, there in the slightly further up, on the top left there. Oh, these are some of the monasteries that, pictures of them. There was a lot of destruction in the 60s with the Cultural Revolution. They've been repaired since, but it just gives an idea of the locations. So in 1249, he's now in his mid-40s, he was invited to go to Tserpu, which is where the first Karmapa had established the main monastery, just northwest of Lhasa, about 50 kilometers or so. Again, quite remote, not in Lhasa at all, but in a remote valley. And this is a picture from pre-1959. It was largely destroyed. It's been rebuilt since. But even when Karma Pakshi arrived there, certainly it may have been largely him as well. It became quite tall, as we'll see, because there was a large statue that was inside the building. So presumably it wasn't as large as this way back in the 13th century. And in fact, when he got there, he said that the monastery was in ruins. Not only that, but the Sangha was somewhat in ruins too. The monks had started drinking. It had become somewhat dissolute. So he spent the next 6 years trying to improve the Sangha and the buildings as well. He was doing a sort of reparation, because this is a good 50 years after Dusum Khenpa had died. And if you don't have a charismatic leader, you can quite understand how monasteries can become decrepit, rather. So he spent 6 years doing this, and in the meantime, over in China and Mongolia, Kublai Khan was beginning his part of the campaigns of continuing the conquering of, or the attempt to conquer China. And Kublai Khan had come down, you see the mountainous brown area there, he'd come down to the kingdom of Dali, received subjugation, and then was proceeded back up north, more to his homeland in northern China. And presumably on the way he had heard of this unusual meditator who'd been in East Tibet. So he sent a messenger to Tsurpu and asked Karmapa to come and teach at his court. Kublai Khan was not emperor yet. His brother had only just become emperor in 51, 52. But he sent this invitation, and Karmapa was somewhat reluctant to go. He said, shall I go, shall I not? And yet again, he had a vision which said that if you go, it'll be fine. It turned out to be not always fine, but anyway. And so he did decide to go. He'd only just come, 6 years earlier, had revived this main monastery in central Tibet. So he was perhaps slightly nervous. And not only that, he had, in a sense, run away from Mongol forces earlier with his guru, about 20 years earlier. So he went and met Kublai Khan in northwest China, northeast Tibet, just beyond northwest Tibet, northeast Tibet. And at first, the reception was excellent. Kublai Khan was slightly younger than him. I think that Kublai Khan's main wife, Chabi, was not so keen on him, but anyway, Kublai Khan was very welcoming to him, and Karmapa gave him the Bodhisattva vow and some instruction. But then Karmapa had another vision and decided that there was going to be trouble with his court. So he left rather suddenly, it seems, because Kublai Khan became annoyed about this, and we'll see 5 or so years later the consequence of that. So he left, but he spent time in the area preaching, teaching, repairing buildings, repairing stupas and so forth. He's still south of the desert area that one has to cross to go up to Mongolia. And while he was there, messengers came from Karakoram, from Mongi Khan. Mongi Khan, the elder brother of Kublai Khan, was emperor of a vast area from, we could say, from Korea right across to Poland. He'd been in Kiev in 1240 himself. But he was emperor ruling at this time from Karakoram, the imperial center in Mongolia. This time Karmapa had no qualms about going, and he crossed over the desert area and proceeded to Karakoram, where he met Mongi Khan. This isn't a picture of him meeting him. He does have a black hat, which is associated with the blue figure, has a black hat associated with Karmapa, but it's not him at all. It's just a nice picture. So, as he's approaching Mongi Khan and this vast city with a lot of tents, well, vast for those times anyway. Actually, Mongi Khan was out on his travels at the time, so they came across him just slightly southwest of Karakoram. But as he approached, he had something of an intuition. Something came together about a prophecy conundrum that had presumably had been bothering him, because what had happened was that Dusun Khenpa, knower of the three times, meaning that he knew the past, the present, and the future, referring to his lives. He'd spoken about past lives a number of times. And at some point, disciples asked him, quite naturally, so where will you be born in the future? Presumably wishing to keep a connection with them. And he'd given three main examples in a slightly vague way. And one was over on the west side of Tibet, one was south in India, and one, he'd said that he was going to be reborn for the sake of one being, which is quite unusual for the Buddhist bodhisattva idea, because in that, especially for tulkus, the idea is that they reincarnate for the benefit of all beings, helping to promulgate the Buddhist teaching. So it sort of goes, it seems to go against the bodhisattva vow. But as he approached, and I presume saw this tented city, he came to realize that maybe it was, if he has a good connection with this emperor of the huge area, that if he can help him in Buddhist terms, then it will help many people. It's like converting one or assisting one to assist many others. And so we could say that that was sort of the second stage, that he realized that there was some validity to Dusun Khenpa's prophecy. So he met Mongol Khan, and it was brought before him at the court, and Mongol Khan said to him, so you're a teacher, a famous meditation teacher, knows about rituals and so forth. Get rid of my obstacles. Quite a big demand. And Karmapa Pakshi somewhat bravely replied, I'll think about it. Overnight. And the next morning he managed to get an audience again with the emperor. There's many, many different religions sort of vying for the emperor's, one can imagine, emperor's attention at this time. William of Rubruck had been there 2 years earlier from, Belgium area, northern France. And so Karmapa Pakshi came back in the morning to see him, and he actually he said, I'll do the best that I can, but he made some demands, or conditions, should we say. He asked the emperor that he should distribute food and wealth to the population. He asked that they should repair monasteries, which Mongol Khan did, that he should make bountiful sky offerings. This is more a Mongolian tradition, so he's not asking him to necessarily become a Buddhist immediately, but to keep going in his own tradition. And that he should set free prisoners as well. It's not quite clear if they were hostage-type prisoners or whether they were criminal prisoners. The Mongol forces were well known for taking hostage prisoners, so it may have been to do with that. It's not entirely clear. But certainly Mongol Khan is said to have agreed to this, and he actually released prisoners on 13 times, on 13 occasions, while Karmapa Pakshi was in the court. And we do have a separate record on a stele that Mongol Khan issued a proclamation that there should be no cattle slaughter or hunting, in other words, killing of animals, on certain days of the month. And Karmapa Pakshi doesn't mention specifically the months, but he does say on several times during the month he persuaded Mongol Khan to issue an edict that it shouldn't be done. perhaps not, we don't know exactly, empire-wide, but certainly in the court, which would indicate that Karmapa himself was perhaps vegetarian. It's not entirely sure, but it might indicate that. He spent quite a bit of time with Mongolian Khan and gave him the Chakrasamvara initiation and also the teaching on the introduction to the three kayas and some Mahamudra teaching. Now, this is a warrior. It's quite unusual, it would seem to us. But Karmapa did actually say that Mongolian Khan was a very good meditator. Apparently, he could apply his mind to Mahamudra meditation as well. But of course, he was a warrior at heart, and Mongolian Khan started to gather his forces, and he was going to go further south to continue the battles against Chinese forces in China, continuing his grandfather's legacy, so to speak, of trying to conquer China, Genghis Khan. Karmapa left him. He wasn't necessarily going to travel with these warriors, and he went across to Al-Malik and did some preaching there, but he only spent about a week. And as far as he said, he was well received, but perhaps it wasn't as successful. The Al-Malik court there at the time, it was a minority court, but the mother was sort of more in charge. They seemed to be more interested in Islam than the Buddhism. So he left shortly afterwards and came along one of the silk routes. He spent some time at Kucha, and it was there that he had a dream, a vision of a huge Buddha, 60 feet, 18 meters or so. And the Buddha spoke to him and said, build a statue as large as I am, which with medieval technology would seem to be quite difficult. But this became quite important to him eventually towards the end of his life. And he actually succeeded. So he proceeded further, and he actually met up again in 1258 with Mongolian Khan at the, forgive my Chinese pronunciation, Liu Panshan mountains in that area there. There was a drought there at the time, and again, Mongolian Khan asked for some special help, ritual help with it, and apparently Karmapa made it rain through a ritual. But after a little while, in 1259, Mongolian Khan proceeded further into China, and Karmapa remained in that area, continuing the preaching, the repairing that he'd been doing a few years earlier, 2 or 3 years earlier. So Mongolian Khan proceeded further into central China, and he died from disease in 1259. And as a consequence, his two younger brothers, Arik Böke and Kublai Khan, Arik was the very youngest, Kublai, they both declared themselves as the overall emperors. And then there was something of a civil war as a consequence in 1260. Now Kublai Khan, if you remember, Karmapa had left the court of Kublai Khan rather suddenly and annoyingly, and Kublai Khan had also heard of him being rather successful up in Karakoram area, and so he took him to be on the side of Arik Böke. Arik Böke had been in Karakoram as well with Mongolian Khan, so Karmapa had quite a connection with him, and Kublai Khan then issued an execution warrant on Karmapa. because he took him as being part of the other side. He tried to have him killed several times, but it seems that it becomes quite legendary. There have been songs written about it at the time. Well, certainly the tradition came, we know of the tradition continuing until the song until the 20th century. But he couldn't kill him, so he just kept him and sent him into internal exile, right up in the northeast corner of China. And it's not entirely clear exactly where he went, but it does say that it could either be a sea or a lake, but on an island, on a sea or a lake. And I'd rather think that it's, well, beyond Xanadu. I'd rather think it's in this area here, because it has some islands. Karmapa remarks on the area being very barren as well. It's sort of volcanic rock area there. And there are two barren islands as well. So he was in exile there for a couple of years, writing. He spent the time writing, and it's really when he did quite a lot of writing there. And eventually, in 1264, the civil war was over and Kublai Khan was the victor. So Karmapa was brought back to what was beginning to be Beijing. It wasn't yet properly founded or built, but he was still imprisoned there in a temple, but they locked him up, they had guards, and for some reason he suddenly appeared outside the prison. And this seemed to change Kublai Khan's mind somewhat, and he asked Karmapa to be his teacher again. But I think that perhaps Karmapa had had enough by then. He said, no thanks, I'd like to return home. He was getting on quite a bit now. He's in his 60s. But it takes him 8 years to get all the way back to central Tibet. He spent some time in the monasteries in East Tibet, building statues, enhancing them. He was quite rich by now. They don't seem to have taken away his wealth. That Mongolian Khan and perhaps Kublai Khan, certainly Mongolian Khan, we have an example of how much silver he gave to Karmapa. Although he was imprisoned and so forth, they don't seem to have taken away his wealth. And he managed to transport it all the way back to Tsopu, where he proceeded to build again and, of course, create this statue that he'd been commanded in a vision to build. It's quite difficult to imagine. It was a metal statue. It doesn't say whether it was cast or repoussé, hammered metal. I think it is the repoussé. I don't know. It doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. It got destroyed in the Cultural Revolution. They have since built another statue, but it's much smaller. It's not as big. It's a seated Sakyamuni statue. And to actually, collect the ore, make it into the metal and then beat it out must have been really quite a task. And he said, he does mention that there were quite some difficulties, there were obstacles to it, that there was some sort of protest amongst the workers, disturbance amongst the workers doing it, and then that spread to the kitchens, and somebody died. So it was really quite a difficult project, but important to him because he got it done. And you could imagine an 18-meter high seated Buddha statue. I think if the Statue of Liberty was sitting down, it would be about that high, something like that anyway. So it's really quite tall. And it became something of a pilgrimage site quite soon, because we'll see why that's important in a second. So this is the replacement statue that's been built there. I actually saw this being created, what was it, 95 or so, 94, 95, 1994, 95. It's very noisy because they're all beating the metal. But it is smaller. It's said to be 40 feet. Somebody's estimated it, somebody who's estimated it at 40 feet. Hi. So then we get to the third stage of establishing the reincarnate tradition. So he has this quite deliberate, it would seem, preparation for both the physical, the body reincarnation, and the lineage continuity. So this statue becomes a place of pilgrimage. It's 50 kilometers from Lhasa, and firstly, an itinerant pottery family came there in a group from southern Tibet, and they'd come to, pay their respects as a pilgrimage to this statue, which was something of a wonder at the time, one of the tallest in the medieval world, and before going on to Lhasa. And at some point, this man and his wife, Karmapa actually called them aside and said, "I need to ask you to loan me your house sometime." And the potter was aghast at this, because here's this great man who's met emperors, has this wonderful statue, and he's asking me to borrow my house. So he goes back to his party, the pilgrims, and he tells them this story, and they just laugh at him because he's an itinerant potter. So they say, he has no house. You've got no house. Why should he ask you that? So it was something of a mystery. And then a bit later, Ugyenpa Rinchen Pel comes to visit, and he is a sort of wandering yogi type, very highly respected. He also met Kublai Khan, and but he only spends 3 days at Tsurpu, and in this time, Pakshi asks him to be the conduit between himself and the next reincarnation. So he gives him some instruction, and he gives him an initiation, and during the initiation, apparently that's when some kind of transmission of mind to mind happened, which then the older teacher 5 years later gives to the identified child. Now there had been before people either writing to say, either to say themselves or to be written about by others as being the reincarnation of somebody before. But it hadn't been continuous, and it wasn't a child. It was always somebody, an adult, and then you look back and you think, oh, he's very similar to so-and-so, or he's done the same kind of work. He's a reincarnator. This is the first time that it's going to be, even Pakshi himself was several years born after the first Karmapa, Dusukyenpa. There was a gap of 11 years. This is the first time that it's going to be from the deceased person to a child. But it hasn't happened yet. And then there's the transmission to Nyenre Gendambum as well, as sort of his close disciple. And you'll often see in paintings of Pakshi a small figure right next, very close to him, sometimes with his name acknowledged, sometimes not. And that's usually Nyenre Gendambum. So between the two of them, I think that Nyenre Gendambum was more concerned with bringing up the child in the regular things of the rituals, of the tradition, and the philosophy. But Ugyenpa was the one who would transmit the sort of inner essence of the teaching to the new child, new incarnation. So Karma Pakshi had a stroke at one time, 1282, and then he seemed to recover a little bit. Well, it doesn't mention him not being able to walk and talk properly after a while. But then the next year he died, he passed away. And then 5 years later, a child was discovered. Reports were sent to Ogyempa, and he came and recognized this child as being the third Karmapa, the incarnation of Karma Pakshi. And there's been a book by Ruth Gamble about it. She found an account that the third Karmapa made of his transition period between one life and the next, which is interesting, in what's known as the bardo, the intermediary period between death and life. So it had been known about, it had been referred to by Tibetan historians, but we hadn't known which text it was, and she's found what's most probably it contained within another text. So that is of interest. And then when we get to the fourth, when the third Karmapa dies, he died in Beijing. When we get to the fourth, you could say that it almost begins to be expected. And a child appears, announces that he is the fourth, and gets certified. And then the whole transmission continues. It's been continuing for 800 years. We're now on the 17th Karmapas. So another important legacy of Karma Pakshi relates really quite modern times. The meditation practices that have been derived from termas. These are discovered practices, either discovered physically or sometimes inspired in people's minds. And there was one from the 17th century by Yonghe Mingyo Rinpoche, the first one. The current one is quite a famous teacher, which is about Karma Pakshi. And also Chogyam Trungpa, who went to America, and he was inspired by Karma Pakshi as well for the sadhana of Mahamudra. And in particular, the Karma Pakshi practice, the 17th century Karma Pakshi practice from Mingyo Rinpoche, when the 16th Karmapa, who's now deceased, but when he first came to the West in the 70s, everywhere he went, he was keen that people should practice the Karma Pakshi practice. And there you see him actually in a Karma Pakshi pose that occurs during the practice, the visualization that one does. It's posing for the camera. And we have Yonghe Mingyo even now giving the initiation, and it's been translated usefully into Chinese. It's been translated into English, French, German as well. And Dharma practitioners use this practice. It's a core practice, core guru yoga practice of the Karma Kagyu. And this all derives from Karma Pakshi. With Chogyam Trungpa, he was traveling to Bhutan in the 60s, 68, and he had an inspiration to write a terma, and it was very quickly translated into English. We have in the Bodleian one of the first typescripts of it that was being practiced by the end of 68 in Scotland, in the monastery, Samyeling monastery there, translated into English. And then Trungpa later went to America and promulgated this sadhana of Mahamudra as well. So it's become important for more American I suppose, Buddhist practitioners. And here we have a picture of Karmapa Pakshi with Mongolian Khan, slightly smaller. They're making offerings. It's a painting, and it's perhaps he's been extolled by the Tibetans, certainly amongst Tibetans. I think across the sects, you couldn't be entirely sure, as being the originator of the reincarnate tradition. Certainly the originator of the tradition that has continued the longest, perhaps. And so that's how it has happened through these 3 stages during his life. And also the meditation practices of his the Terma have been important. In the 17th century, the Karma Chagmi wrote that actually he thought that Karmapa Pakshi was influential also in combining the Kagyu and the Nyingma somewhat. If you remember, he studied in Katok monastery, and when you look at some of his works, there's a particular work that the Punsum Tsokpa Jamsatai, that he lists a lot of tantras, and about half the tantras you could call the new tantras and half are the Nyingma tantras. So he seemed to be not quite so sectarian as you might expect. And later, in the time of the 19th century, when the Rime movement, the sort of more economical movement, was starting, they looked back and said that maybe Karmapa Pakshi was influential in this way because of his combining of the Kagyu and the Nyingma at the time. The same happened with the third Karmapa as well. He's recognized as being a great Nyingma master too. But so there's some claim that he was influential on the Rime movement. But mostly, I think we can say that it's the reincarnation system of going from an older person dying to a child and managing to keep the transmission going, both the physical and the spiritual transmission being made continuous, which is so important to Tibetan Buddhism. And we even get reincarnation coming to Oxford, famously. The Karmapa was supposed to come at one time, but there were visa problems, so he didn't. Thank you very much.